Hey, welcome back to Road Tripping with Rachel. I'm Rachel. Thank you so much for joining me here on this road trip. If you are new to the channel, we are hopping into Nehemiah chapter 10. We've been spending the beginning of this year going through the book of Nehemiah. Last year we went through the Gospel of John, but I enjoy taking you along through different Bible studies and just taking you along through life and even on some of the road trips that I get onto because I just love to go and explore. But as we're going through Nehemiah 10, we are really getting in towards the end of Nehemiah now. We're starting to see a lot of ramp up of where the people, they've returned. They have the floor of the temple, they have the altar, and Nehemiah has been working with them to construct the walls. And he is there with the leave of the king of Persia from Susa, and he is now here. And we're coming up really to the end where they are praising and worshiping now, and they are celebrating the fact that this rather big undertaking has been accomplished. In other words, they have protection now. Up to this point, they really hadn't had that. And I always encourage people, you need to be reading this yourself. A lot of this is my musings and what I'm getting out of the studies. But I would also encourage you, if you want to go just a little bit deeper and read more of what I've been working on and see more of my thought process, you can always go to my website, www.roadtrippingwithRachel.com, and that is where I post my blogs, so that way you can actually read more of the notes in a bit more well-constructed format and see a lot of my references that I'm using as well. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into chapter 10. So as I said, they are now, there's praise, there's worship, they've finished the wall, they are now praising God for what has now been accomplished. And in my reading, I think I really see 5 commitments that they're really making to God through this. Now, yes, the Israelite people, they are covenanted. That means that they are there is a formal agreement between them and God that they are going to be his people. They will praise, they will worship him, and there is all different types of we would consider it laws, but it's kind of more rules for how the relationship works. You can read a lot of that if you go through Exodus, I would say 19 tells you why they have the rules. And moving forward, there's also ceremonial laws as well as just day-to-day laws. I would encourage you to go back and read that for yourself, because a lot of it makes way more sense once you understand this. But it is now at that point though where we're seeing some of these major commitments, and I think a lot of them are things that we can also in modern day look at and appreciate. And my hair is I'm gonna have to put another pin in there. Please ignore that during this video. All right, so the very first thing that I really noticed as I was reading through chapter 10 is that they are committing to, they are going to protect the home. Now, I argue this point because I would say that sin really begins in the home. If we go back to the Chronicles, specifically Second Chronicles, you really see where when they really began to intermarry. And if you read through the blog post, I will say this over and over again, this was not an ethnic issue. It was a moral and spiritual issue, because the nations that surrounded them did not believe in Yahweh, the God of the Bible. And when you have two people who get married and you're living together, you're doing life together, if you are not pulling in the same direction, someone is going to break and someone is going to give. And if you are truly devout in your beliefs, it really shouldn't be you. I'm just saying. And what was happening is although I do not say happy wife, happy life, I don't think that is necessarily a healthy demographic. I believe more in happy spouse, happy house. But the men of Israel were bringing in a lot of women from these nations that were surrounding them. And since the women were dictating really like how the home itself was being run, they were bringing in a lot of their idols and a lot of their gods. And it was setting the trajectory for how their children were going to be raised and what their children were going to believe. And as a result, their children were not believing the Bible. They were believing whatever, or Torah, or the scriptures. Their children were believing in these false deities. And that is why I would say, like, they were charged, like, you need to protect your home. So you need to really think about what it is that you're bringing in. You need to like filter it through. Like, is this wholesome? Is it good? Is this going to be glorifying to God? Is this going to be something that is going to take me down a path that is not going to be good or safe, or will cause a lot of damage to someone, particularly like your children if you're married with kids, or to your spouse? That was something that I don't think was really parsed out, really, I think, within scripture, or at least like that's not something that's explicitly stated. It is talked about like really heavily, like if you go through Torah, like the importance of like, do not marry, and with the exception of unless they join the fellowship, like Ruth, like Rahab. But you know, when you have to guard what you're bringing into your home really should be your sanctuary. It should be a safe place. It shouldn't be something to where like you're bringing in all these things and then you're raising your kids to go in the total opposite direction. And like here it was like physical idols that they were bringing into the house, but we bring in stuff all the time. Like when we teach our kids that, like, you know, you're really good at baseball, you should, like, we're going to put you in a travel team and we're going to travel on Sundays and we're not going to be in church. I mean, sorry if I'm stepping on a toe there, but you know, I have friends who, like, this is the decisions that their families made, and now those families aren't in church anymore because they taught their children that that there are things that are more important than God and your relationship with God. And in that particular scenario, it was baseball. Baseball was more important than God, and it's not. I'm just telling you, it's not, because you can get hurt, and then your baseball career is over. And let me just say, the particular individual I'm thinking of actually did get hurt in college. He doesn't do baseball anymore. So what does he have to show now for all that time that he put into that? But also the idea of like what you're bringing in, you know, your home is private to a certain degree. You know, you control like who gets to come in and who, and all of that. Like, you're in control of the people you allow into your home. So we tend to think, especially like here in the United States, that if we're affiliated with something, like we are actually a part of that. So it is, your faith is not a corporate expression. It is a personal expectation. So which that probably didn't come out correct, but what I'm talking about is that your faith is your own, and your home should be reflecting that, and the things that you bring into your home should be reflecting that. Corporate worship is where the believers all gather together, and you can attend church every Sunday and be a part of like this corporate group, be singing the songs, be taking notes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a personal relationship with God. And so you can do all the things corporately, but that doesn't mean you are doing all the things for yourself privately. And your home will ultimately reflect that. The things you're allowing in, the way you're treating your family, the way you're treating your children, the way you treat your spouse. And I mean, that's kind of a scary concept, in all honesty. The second thing was, you're really supposed to rely on God to be your provider. So this is where we really get into the whole idea of Sabbath, the idea that like you need to take a break. You do need to trust that God is going to provide for you. I've personally seen where God does provide. When I am faithful, He is faithful. And that is something that they were committing to keeping in mind, that their needs were going to be met, and that there was always going to be their needs where it would come through. We tend to think like, oh, I need this, like the newest toy. No, you want the newest toy. It is not necessarily a need. A need is food, water, shelter. Those are needs. Being able to pay your bills is a need. Being able to go buy a bunch of junk food at the grocery store is not a need, that is a want. And when God provides for your needs, he gives you the means in order to do that. Sometimes the way that he's providing for you is he provides you with a job that you go to, you earn money, and then you're able to go to the grocery store. You're able to pay your bills. You're able to do these things. Or you learn how to go without. You learn how to sew and you patch your pants. Or you learn how to sew a button on. You learn how to bake sourdough. Like different things like that. That your needs will be met, but that doesn't mean you're not going to have to put in some effort and some work to it. Another commitment that they make is that they're going to give their best to God. Now, sometimes their best, like by our definition, it really wouldn't be that great. I'm always reminded of the story of the widow's mites. Here's this widow who didn't have an income, who didn't have everything, but she gave what she had, and that offering was worth more in the eyes of God than the man who comes and drops in a bunch of gold pieces. And that is something that we need to keep in mind as well, that when we come to faith, like we are committing that we're going to give our best to him. And that means like we're going to do our very best to be able to give, to support the mission in whatever capacity that means. We tend to think of that like as financially, and it is, like we should be giving to our local congregations, and we should be giving to other needs and causes like as we feel led to, but we can also be giving of our time. We can be giving of our talents. We're loving and supporting each other like within the church, and loving our neighbors who maybe aren't believers too. And it also, like when you give your best, like that's a show of faith as well, that you have talents and abilities that you're putting to good use. The fourth real commitment that I see is that the people were to give themselves over to God's work. So as we go through Nehemiah, you'll see like as they were building and constructing, everyone really had a job to do. We are to be ministers of the gospel. So in one sense, like I really don't like when we assign titles to people like in churches. Now, yes, we do have people who are called by God to vocationally serve in the church. That would be our preachers, our pastors, sometimes our elders, if you come from a church background like that, where they serve. But really, you know, every Christian is a minister of the gospel. We are all called to preach the gospel to those who are around us. Now, I say preach, that doesn't necessarily mean you're standing behind a pulpit with a microphone and you are expounding and proclaiming with a 5-point sermon that uses alliteration. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is you're sitting down and you're holding a conversation with someone and you are sharing what God is doing in your life. You're reminding yourselves and those around you, like, God is faithful and this is what he has done and this is what he is doing and this is what he will do. You're preaching the gospel both to yourself and to other believers, because we still need to hear it. Even when you're a believer, you still need to be reminded of the gospel and what God has done for us, because sometimes life is just hard. It's really hard. And sometimes God does feel distant. I'm not going to deny that. Sometimes he feels really distant, but that doesn't mean he is. It's normally because like we're the ones who are more distant, or we're just going through something in that moment where it's just like, you just don't know what way is up. And when you can be reminded that God is faithful, God keeps his promises, God has given us Jesus, that we have faith, that we have the hope in the things not yet seen, that we have this assurance that, you know, God wins in the end. That is a preaching of the gospel, and you are able to minister to fellow believers and minister to people who don't believe as well. And hopefully they'll see God's light shine through you if you've been reading, if you were around for John. And if you've been reading my blog post, because I'm getting caught up on all my John posts too, then you're able to see that how faithful God really is. And you can remind people of that. And then finally, you need to provide for your ministers, for those people who are called vocationally into ministry. I'm going to have a mini soapbox here real quick. They do deserve to be paid, and they deserve to be paid a living wage. There are plenty of pastors out there who are overpaid. I'm not going to deny that. You and I, if you're watching this, you can probably think of a few people right now who you're like, man, I should go into ministry if you made that kind of money. But there are a whole lot of pastors out there who are bivocational or who are completely vocational, and they love their people. They love their congregations, and they are not paid a living wage at all. Your pastors should be paid a living wage. And the way that they are paid a living wage is because the congregation is giving to them. So if you struggle with giving financially to the church, and we all go through it. We all go through where we struggle. I have gone through a time where I've really struggled to like just be able to give like that, where it's like this is a bill. Like, hear me say, I completely understand that. But also, if I'm struggling, that person up behind the pulpit is probably also struggling. And I'm sorry, like your pastor should be making, in my opinion, like the average median income that is reflected within the congregation. If your congregation is primarily and on average bringing in over, let's say $100,000 a year, your pastor should be making something close to that. If the average income is like 50,000-60,000 a year, then your pastor should be making somewhere in that, because that is conducive with the people and what they should be able to give, as well as really from a very business standpoint, a worker is worth their wages. So if your pastor is full-time and he is working and he is giving and he's good, because there are meetings, there is a certain businessy aspect to ministry. If he's doing all of that and still showing up on Sundays, he is taking time away from his family. He's putting a lot of himself out there. Like, he's basically painted a target on himself or herself if you come from one of those backgrounds. Don't make finances be one of the darts that's going at him. Care for your ministers, like those who are like doing this vocationally at your local level, and give. Don't make finances be a dart that's being fired at them. And this was something that that Nehemiah and the Bible both really talk about, especially like right here where like with the Levites, like they weren't being paid monetarily, but they were being paid in food. So that way they didn't have to worry about going out and working the fields, that the people were instructed to give them food. So that was something they didn't have to worry about them and their families. Don't make that a dart that's being fired at your pastors. All right. So that's really Nehemiah 11. Or 10, we're actually going to get into Nehemiah 11 next time. Super excited. We're going to hit actually not just 11, but we're going to cover 11 and 12 next time. And I hope to see you all there. All right. We'll see you all next time. Bye.